Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, brothers and sisters. We'll be continuing today, inshallah ta'ala, in our series, a commentary on the last 10 chapters of the Quran. And we have now reached chapter number 107, Surat Al-Maa'oon. As always, we like to give some background information about the chapter. We talk about the names of the surah, the period in which it was revealed, if there's any sabab al-nuzul, if there's any precursor to its revelation. We mention that. If there's a background story, we mention that. And also, if there is a summary, we'll also mention that as well. And so that's what we'll do here in the opening. The names of the surah are two. It has been referred to by the scholars as Al-Maa'oon and Surat Ra'ayta. Both of these names are apparently ijtihadiyah. They are names which the scholars have applied to the surahs after the period of Tashri'ah, after the time of the Prophet and his companions. The first name, Al-Maa'oon, is a name of the surah bil-ijma', by agreement of the scholars. And Ara'ayta is a name which has commonly been used by the scholars as well. Alternatively to Al-Maa'oon, they will say Surat Ara'ayta, meaning the surah, the chapter which begins with the words Ara'ayta. Whether or not there is some debate, amongst the scholars as to whether or not the surah is Makkiyah or Madaniyah. So there are basically three opinions. The first opinion, which is the opinion of the majority of the scholars, is that it is Makkiyah. The surah was revealed in Mecca. The second opinion is that it is Madaniyah, and that is the opinion of Qatada and others. And the third opinion is that the surah, the first half of it was revealed in Mecca regarding Al-As ibn Wa'il, and the second half of the surah was revealed in Medina regarding or referencing Abd'Llah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, the chief of the hypocrites in Medina. There is no specific precursor or incident that prompted the revelation of the surah. As far as the summary of the themes of the surah, or the themes presented in the surah speaks briefly about two categories of undesirable people. Two types of people that no one should want to be like. And the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes them in the surah in such a very concise manner, it's a very relatively short surah, but he describes them aptly and describes them concisely, is for two reasons. One is so that the believers will recognize them, will know that these are those people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was referencing in the Quran and telling us that these people are undesirable. And the second reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes them in the surah in this way is so that the believers not only will recognize them, but will also avoid resembling them. Will look at themselves, do introspection on themselves regularly, and make sure that they themselves are not resembling the qualities of these people which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described in the Quran or in this surah specifically as undesirable. The first group that Allah describes in the surah is the disbelievers, and the second group that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the surah is the hypocrites. And both of them, they have some things in common, as you'll see in the surah, and they have some things where they are different. As far as what they have in common, neither of them do good to their Creator by worshiping Him, nor to the creation by being kind to them in word and deed. As far as what they have, which is not in common, the way in which they differ, or the disparity between the two groups, is that the disbelievers, they deny Allah altogether, while the hypocrites are heedless of their prayers and offer them only to give the false impression that they are engaged in worship. So they pretend to be heedless of Allah while they pretend to heed Allah, to be mindful of Allah, while in reality they are heedless. So the believers are openly heedless, and then the hypocrites pretend to be mindful while they in reality are heedless. So that's how they differ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He opens the surah by saying, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. Have you seen the one who belies the deen? And this question is actually what we call istifham biqasd at-ta'jib. It is a rhetorical question with the intention of prompting or inspiring amazement and indignation at the same time. So it's like a rhetorical question, like a person asking, saying, can you believe that? Can you believe that he said that? Can you believe that he did that? The person is not asking you if you really believe it. They're not expecting a response. But they're saying that as if to say, can you, like, this is unbelievable. I can't believe it. I'm amazed by the fact he did this, this terrible thing that is worth what? Worthy of contempt and indignation and so on. And this is the meaning, or this is the message in Allah's statement when He says, "Ara'ayta alladhi yukadhibu bid-din?" Have you seen the one who belies the deen? He's not asking us, have we seen it, but rather saying that we should be amazed by him, and we should also be indignant and have contempt for him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentioned this basically to call attention, or to basically to open, to lay the foundation for describing this one who yukadhibu bid-din, the one who belies the deen. And the scholars have differed about the specific person intended by the statement of Allah, have you seen the one? Alladhi yukadhibu bid-din, the one who belies the deen. But what is important, as we say, as it is said by Ahlul Tafsir, al-ibratu bi umum al-lafz la bi khusus as-sabab. What is matter and is what of real substance and importance is not who specifically is being referred to, but rather the fact that the one who belies the deen has certain qualities, and we should know those qualities to avoid having those qualities and resembling the people with those qualities. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to divide those two, the one who belies the deen, into two categories. And the first one is al-kafir, the disbeliever, and the second one is al-munafiq, the hypocrite. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to begin first and foremost with the kafir and describe him, and then He's going to address the munafiq, the hypocrite. But before He does that, before we go to that description, we want to focus on this word ad-deen. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, have you not seen the one who belies the deen? And there's some debate amongst the scholars regarding what is intended by the deen here. So the first opinion is that of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, who said ad-deen here means hukmullah. And what he likely means by hukmullah is hukmullah fil akhirah, the ruling of Allah upon people, or the judgment of Allah upon people in the hereafter. And in that way, or in that sense, the opinion of Ibn Abbas, or his commentary, his tafsir, his interpretation, is akin to that of Mujahid and Ikrimah, because they said it means al-hisab, it means the account and reckoning. And in that way, it's akin to the third opinion, which is the opinion which was transmitted by Al-Mawardi, who said that it refers to the recompense, reward, or punishment, al-jaza, that people will receive for their deeds in the hereafter. So in that sense, all of those first three are very much alike, and they're more, the difference between them is more semantical. It's more semantics than anything else. That basically they're all saying the same thing. Ad-deen means what? Yawm al-qiyamah, when Allah will pass judgment on the people and give them a reward or a punishment for their deeds. The last of the four opinions regarding ad-deen is that it refers to Al-Quran. And this appears to be an outlier, an odd, a weak tafsir, because commonly the Quran is not referred to in the Quran as ad-deen, as basically, as ad-deen. So the meaning of the verse, therefore, that first verse, which lays the foundation for what is to come, the description of these two groups of people, is that, do you know the one who disbelieves and denies judgment, reckoning, and the reward and punishment that follows them? Do you know the qualities by which such a person can be recognized? Do you know the qualities? It's important for you, O believer, to know these qualities. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins what? Describing them. So as we said, we can A, recognize them for what they are, disbelievers and hypocrites, and 2, we can avoid ourselves resembling them. So Allah begins with the first quality, and as we said, He begins by describing the kafir. He says, فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُّ الْيَتِيمِ. For that is he who repels the orphan. This word yadu'u in Arabic, I'm sorry, it literally means to shove a person forcefully. And it can also have a figurative meaning as well, and both the literal and the figurative meaning of this word yadu'u is intended here. So the disbeliever, he may actually literally shove the orphan ruthlessly to show his contempt for the orphan and to show his lack of pity for his condition. And as we've mentioned repeatedly in different places here in this series and in other series, we've mentioned how during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, people with social handicaps like orphans and others were treated very poorly. They were treated very poorly in the society. And they could actually literally be what? Be pushed, kicked, cursed, shouted at, berated, etc. They would be treated poorly by the people in the society who didn't have those social handicaps. So definitely the literal meaning is intended. That do you see the disbeliever? The disbeliever is the one who what? Will actually shove and be cruel and be very brutal and insensitive towards the orphan. But also the figurative meaning is also intended. Meaning that he pushes the orphan to the side, figuratively speaking, stepping in front of him when that orphan is about to receive some type of what? Some type of entitlement. So if the orphan, for example, was due to inherit some wealth, that person would step in front of the orphan, shove him to the side, figuratively speaking, and usurp that wealth and take it for himself and deny the orphan, and no one would stand up for the orphan. Okay, so these are the two possible meanings of the statement of Allah when he says, Yadu'ul yatim, he shoves the orphan to the side. He repulses or repels the orphan. It could be literal, he literally shoves him, or it could be what? Figurative, meaning what? He shoves him to the side, figuratively speaking, and denies him his rights and entitlements. Then Allah goes on, continuing to describe the disbelievers. He says, وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. Another quality of the disbeliever is that he does not encourage the feeding of the poor. Two meanings here. One is that the disbeliever who has a surplus of wealth or provisions. He has more than what he needs of financial wealth, currency, and more than what he needs of provisions, food, drink, clothing, etc. He will not give that to the needy people, the people who are in need of it, the poor and the needy. He will not give that surplus to them. He will hoard it for himself, for his loved ones, for his kith and kindred, and his friends, etc. He'll hoard it for what? For those people, even if they don't necessarily need it. They're not in need of it. So that's one meaning of لا يحض على طعام المسكين. He does not encourage the feeding of the poor, meaning he doesn't feed them himself. He doesn't give to them himself. The second meaning is not only does he not give them himself, but if he sees other people giving, if he sees other people giving to the poor from their surplus wealth, he will discourage them. He will tell them how stupid they are for giving away what they have, which they may need to save for a rainy day. That if you give now, when you need it, you won't have. So you should keep it. So not only is he stingy with this is a person who has reached the height of miserliness. The peak of miserliness. Because not only is he stingy with his own wealth, but he's also stingy with the wealth of others which doesn't belong to him. He won't give from his own wealth, and if he sees somebody else giving, he says, hey, don't give. What are you doing? Don't give. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the disbeliever in this way, that he is so extremely stingy that not only does he not give, he is unhappy and will actually try to prevent other people from giving as well. So this is the case of this disbeliever who belies Allah and any accountability for his actions in front of him. And so because he belies Allah, he doesn't believe in Allah, and doesn't believe in accountability, then he's not going to what? He's not going to worship Allah. And he's going to mistreat those in need of his kindness, because why? He sees no material or spiritual benefit in helping them. This is the quality of the disbeliever. That basically, I don't believe in God. I don't believe there's any accountability. I don't believe in judgment. And therefore, I'm not going to worship Allah. I'm not going to worship a God that I don't believe in. I'm not going to spend my life, my days, and my nights worshiping Allah and waiting for a hereafter or a paradise that I don't believe exists. So that person is not going to do any good deeds. And then he's going to see people who are in need of his help, but he's not going to help them. Why? Because he feels like I will lose materially. I'm giving them my wealth, and therefore I'm losing that wealth. And I'm not going to benefit spiritually because I don't believe in spirituality. This is the description of what? Of the disbeliever. And Allah is telling us this, one, so that we will recognize them. We will recognize the quality of disbelievers, and also so we'll avoid being like that. And unfortunately, some believers, some Muslims, they behave like this. They try to avoid and dodge charity, giving in charity. It's very difficult for them to what? To give, okay? And they are very cruel to people who need their compassion. And so we have to be careful, brothers and sisters. Allah is not telling us this so we read it and say, yeah, those disbelievers, man, they're bad folks. No, He's telling us this so that not only do we recognize the disbelievers, the quality of disbelievers, but so that we avoid having those qualities ourselves, because man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum. Whoever resembles a people is one of them. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala turns his attention to what? To the second group of people that he wants to describe in the surah. And that is al-munafiqeen, the hypocrites. So he begins describing them by saying, فَوَيْلُ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ فَوَيْلُ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. He says, woe unto the worshippers who are heedless of their prayer. Now, as we said, this ayah was revealed concerning the hypocrites. And since they also disbelieve, so this was revealed concerning the hypocrites because they also are from the people what? Yukadibu bid-din. They belie the hereafter. And since they also don't believe, they don't hope to attain any reward for their prayer, nor do they fear any punishment for abandoning it altogether, which makes them what? Heedless. That basically the difference between the hypocrites and the kuffar, the non-believers, is that non-believers will openly what? Say we don't believe, and we're not going to pretend to believe. The hypocrites don't believe internally, but externally, they what? They pretend to believe. So they will pray, but they are heedless in their prayer. Why? Because just like the disbelievers, we don't believe in God, and we don't believe in the hereafter. We don't expect some spiritual reward, some great paradise full of comfort and pleasures. We don't expect that. We don't believe in that. But for whatever reason, we have to pretend. Circumstances dictate that we pretend to believe. We basically put up this farce. We put up this front and make people believe that we believe, but inside, in reality, we are what? We don't believe, which makes them what? Heedless. And heedless can have one of two possible interpretations. The first interpretation is that these hypocrites, when the Prophet and his companions were present, then they would give this, they would practice this ostentation, they would pray out of ostentation and give this insincere display of piety and religious commitment. They would pretend to believe and pretend to pray and to pretend to pray with sincerity. But when the Prophet and his companions, when they were outside of the Prophet and companions' watchful eye, nobody was watching them, they wouldn't pray. They wouldn't pray at all. They didn't pray at all. That's one meaning of what? Of heedless. The second meaning, and this shows, it's important to mention before we mention the second meaning, is that what does this show about the munafiqeen? Just to show what kind of people they were and how we believers should avoid being like them, is that the munafiqeen were more afraid of the reprisal of Allah's creation. What is the Prophet going to say if we don't pray? What are the companions going to say if we don't pray? What is that? That's going to put a spotlight on us and make them doubt us, suspect us, maybe even harm us. So we're going to pray when they're around. But when they're not around, we're not going to pray. Shows they were more concerned about Allah's creation than they were about the Creator. And we have to avoid being like that, oh believers. We can be the people who we behave piously in front of other Muslims. And behind closed doors, we behave differently. When we're around non-Muslims, we behave like non-Muslims. We may even say bad things about Islam. But when we're with the Muslims, we pretend to be with the Muslims. That is hypocrisy. We have to avoid that. The second possible interpretation of heedless is that they don't complete the bowings and prostrations. So that heedless in salat here means that they didn't pray the prayer the way it was supposed to be prayed, or they didn't give the prayer its full right and due. Each position its full right and due. So they would bow, but they wouldn't stay down long enough to complete the bow. Prostrate, but wouldn't stay down long enough to complete the prostration. And we have to be aware of this because there are many Muslims, unfortunately, who pray like this. They pray what? As if they're in a hurry. As if they just need to get this over with. And so they're not completing the bows and prostration. This way they're resembling who? Al-Munafiqeen, who are what? Heedless in their prayer. Allah goes on. He says, الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ, those who seek to be seen while worshipping. And the scholars of Islam, among them the companions and the commentators and the great mufassirun of the companions, have differed and debated about the meaning of they yura'un. They seek to be seen while worshipping. Ibn Mas'ud, he said, Wallahi ma tarakuha al-batta. Walau tarakuha al-batta kanu kuffaran. He says, I swear by Allah, they never abandoned prayer in its entirety. For if they had, they would have become outright disbelievers. But rather, they were not particular about offering the prayers at the prescribed times on a regular basis. So he says the meaning of yura'un is not that they didn't pray at all. He said that because why? He said if they didn't pray at all, they would have become what? Disbelievers. But he said rather they were the people who they weren't particular about praying the prayer at the prescribed times on a regular basis. Ibn Abbas said something similar. He said they delayed the prayer beyond their prescribed times. So for example, they would pray Sooratul at the time of Asr, Asr at the time of Maghrib, Maghrib at the time of Isha. They would delay the prayers beyond their prescribed times. They would do this on a regular basis. It has also been narrated on the authority of Abd'Llah. Abd'Llah has also narrated that it refers to the one who completes his prayer and goes on his way unsure of how many times he offered it. Or I'm sorry, how many units he offered. So for Sooratul he prays. And because he's praying only to be seen, that so people say, oh, so-and-so, they came for prayer. He's not concerned about how many units he prayed. So for example, an example of that would be a person who came to the prayer after the Jama'ah was completed. And he starts praying. So people say, yes, so-and-so came for prayer. He came for Dhuhr, right? But that person is just praying so people will see him. And so he's just like, I'm just going up and down. I don't know how many times I prayed, but I just want them to see me praying so they'll say, yeah, so-and-so prayed. He's not a munafiq. But in reality, he's what? He's a munafiq. So now this brings a question which is asked commonly. Does that mean that if I forget and I lose track in prayer, this is a sign that I'm a hypocrite? Is that what that means? الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ. The people who they're heedless in their prayer and they pray to be seen in worship, meaning they pray and they forget how many they prayed and they don't care how many they prayed. Does that mean that if I forget how many I prayed, I'm not sure, does that mean I become a munafiq? Or it's an indication that I'm a munafiq? The answer is no, not necessarily. Not necessarily. The two are not what? The two are not necessarily inseparably linked. If you forget in prayer, you're automatically a munafiq. That's not what it means. And the reason why we say we know for certain that that's not what it means is why? Because the Prophet ﷺ himself, who is the most pious person and the most sincere believer to ever walk this earth, sometimes he would forget. He would lose track of how many times or how many units he'd offered in prayer. And he was certainly not a munafiq. And also some of the believers, the great believers, the companions, they would also forget sometimes. Right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us something prescribed for us, what we call sujood as-sahu, the prostrations of forgetfulness. He's prescribed this because why? It's something that's going to happen. It's part of human nature to what? To sometimes forget. So that's the first reason. The second reason why we say that Allah did not mean to say that anyone who forgets or loses track in prayer is a hypocrite is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the wording of the Quran is very daqiq. It is very precise. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. Those who are heedless of their prayer. And He didn't say, الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. Those people who are heedless in their prayer. So the difference between the two, an and fi, the difference between being heedless in prayer, meaning you forget, your mind drifts, there's something going on, it's hard to concentrate, and you forget how many you prayed. The difference between that and heedless of the prayer is the one who is heedless in the prayer, the true believer, is that when he loses concentration, he tries to what? He tries to return himself to concentration. He tries to focus on the prayer and push out those thoughts which are distracting him. If he forgets and loses track, he tries to recollect. Did I pray 3 or did I pray 4? I'm not really sure. Did I pray 2 or did I pray 3? I'm not really sure. He tries to what? To recollect. And if he can't recollect, he goes with the number he's certain of. So I know I at least prayed 2, so I'm going to build upon 2. And if I prayed 3, I'm going to err on the side of caution and say I prayed 2 and complete, 2 more units for a 4-unit prayer. And then at the end of the prayer, he prostrates the prostrations of forgetfulness to try to make up for what? For the mistake. Whereas the hypocrite, he doesn't care if he's prayed the correct number or not. And so he makes no attempt to recollect. He makes no attempt to correct any shortcomings that may have occurred in his prayer. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala closes the surah by saying, وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَاعُونَ, describing the hypocrites with one last description. He says, and refuse small kindnesses. Describing them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again as we said, the wording of the Quran is very daqiq, it's very precise. When Allah describes them as small kindnesses, it shows that they are trivial, they are trifling, they are things that are easy to come by and do not usually have a lot of value. They're not costly. And sometimes there's something which doesn't cost anything at all, but there's something that some people may not have or may be in need of. Al-Maa'oon, something small, something trivial, something which doesn't have a lot of value, something which is not costly, something that people may not have, but need it. And the person who has it and needs it, the thing that he has and needs, it's a dime a dozen. It's something. Like, for example, like a needle for sewing. Like a sip of water. Like a match to light a fire. An axe, a cooking pot. Salt, a pinch of salt. And other household items which are commonly borrowed and lent. In this way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns his servants against withholding from sharing these and similar trivial items with others, and refusing the smallest of favors, because doing so is the height of miserliness, stinginess, and is from the most despicable and disgraceful behavior, and one of the biggest qualities, the clearest signs of a person's what? Hypocrisy. That they have a diseased heart, that they won't give something which, like we said, is a dime a dozen, and many times it has no real value. It doesn't usually cost a person anything. What are the lessons that we can take away, brothers and sisters, from what we heard today from the tafsir of Soorat and Maa'oon? The first lesson is that when a person doesn't believe in resurrection, they don't believe in the accounting and the judgment, then that will lead the person to have the worst type of character, the worst type of behavior, the worst type of conduct. And every time a person's faith decreases and goes toward disbelief, that person will what? Will be less and less in terms of doing good deeds, whether those good deeds be directed at the Creator or good deeds directed at the creation. That Iman and being able to do good deeds are inseparably linked, as the Prophet said in the Hadith. He said, "Ala fil jasadi mudghah, idha salahat salaha al-jasadu kullu, wa idha fasadat fasada al-jasadu kullu, ala wa hiya al-qalb." Certainly there is in the body a lump of flesh, that if it is sound and upright, it's pure, it's clean, then the actions will be what? They'll be pure and clean. And if the heart is foul and corrupt, the action will be foul and corrupt. Which means what? There's an inseparable link. The more Iman we have, the more good we're going to do. And the less Iman we have, the less good we're going to do. And so we have to pay attention to that. if I'm not able to do good, if it's difficult for me to do good, just simple things, I can't do it. I struggle with doing it. It means what? There's a problem internally. I can't think my heart is pure on the inside, but I'm just bad on the outside. And there's no link between the two. The second lesson is that Islam, it encourages us to be concerned and to have compassion and mercy and pity for the orphans in general and people with social handicaps in general. Let me say that again. Islam, the second lesson is that Islam encourages us, the believers, to be concerned, to have care and concern, compassion, pity, etc. for orphans in particular and people with social handicaps in general. So there are certain people who are generally left out, looked over, they're considered to be the least and the lowest, etc. They're marginalized. Those types of people, our religion encourages us to do what? To take care of them, to look after them, to have pity on them, to have mercy on them, etc. And it also lets us know, our religion lets us know, and this surah particularly lets us know, that mistreating them, holding them in contempt, looking down upon them, is something which is considered from the worst type of character, the character of the disbelievers and the munafiqeen. Number 3 from the lessons, it's very important for us to realize, brothers and sisters, that prayer is a tremendous yardstick for a person, individual. Our attitude towards prayer says everything about where we are on the scale of what? On the scale of faith. Mu'min, kafir, munafiq. Where we are on that scale can be determined by our concern, our commitment, our attachment, and the way that we look at prayer. Consider, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. Successful indeed are the believers. Those who have khushu', they have concentration and humility in their prayer. They are really in the prayer. They are really praying to Allah when they say, Allahu Akbar. They are really praying. They are really praying to their Lord. They are what? The believers. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the kuffar. And He says, مَا سَلَكَكُمْ فِي سَقَرٍ قَالُوا لَمْ نَكُ مِنَ الْمُصَلِّينَ. He says to disbelievers in the fire, the believers will say to the disbelievers in the fire, what has caused you to land in this awful predicament? What has caused you to land the hellfire? And the disbelievers will respond, لَمْ نَكُ مِنَ الْمُصَلِّينَ. We were not from the people who prayed. The disbelievers don't pray at all. So that's a sign of disbelief, is that you don't pray. We're going to see more about that shortly. Then the munafiqun, what does Allah say about them? He says, الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ. They are the ones who, when they are heedless of their prayer, and they only pray to be seen by men. You see that, ya ikhwan? You see that, ya akhawat? You see that, brothers and sisters? How the prayer is a mi'yar for where we are on what? In the levels of faith. The more committed we are to prayer, the more attentive we are to prayer, the better we pray, the more we pray, the more we are close to what? The pinnacle is what? Of faith. The pinnacle of faith. And we sink, the further and further we get from what? Being committed to prayer and attentive to prayer, the more we sink lower and lower on that scale of what? Of faith. It's a huge gauge. You want to know, am I a believer? Am I really a believer? Look at your prayer. Look at your salat. Number 4 from the lessons is that a true believer doesn't pray for others, but prays for Allah. A true believer prays for Allah. Allah talks about the munafiqeen, الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ. They are the ones who what? Pray to be seen. So it's very important not to pray because what? Well, my parents will get mad if I don't pray. Or my parents will put me on punishment if I don't pray. Right? Or I'm praying because what will my friends say? My Muslim friends, what will they say? No, we have to pray for Allah and not pray for others. The 5th lesson is that abandoning prayer is a type of disbelief. Contemplate the statement of Ibn Mas'ud. He said they didn't abandon prayer. Where he said they didn't, he said, مَا تَرَكُوهَا الْبَتَّةِ لِأَنَّهُمْ لَوْ تَرَكُوهَا الْبَتَّةِ لَكَانُوا كُفَّارًا. Right? He said they didn't abandon the prayer entirely. They did pray sometimes. Because if they didn't pray at all, they would become disbelievers. And the Prophet said in the hadith, and this shows you the understanding of the early Muslims. A person doesn't pray, a person doesn't have faith. And the Prophet said in the hadith, he said, "Al-ahdu alladhi baynana wa baynahum as-salat faman tarakaha faqad kafar." He said the contract, the contract between us and them is the prayer. So whoever denies it, belies it, whoever abandons it has become a disbeliever. And he said in the other hadith, he said, "Alladhi bayna ar-rajuli wash-shirki wal-kufri tark as-salat." That which separates between a person and being a disbeliever or an idolater is abandoning the prayer. So that being said, brothers and sisters, we have to understand that abandoning the prayer was considered by the early Muslims as a type of disbelief. It is a type of disbelief. And so we can't be mutasahilin, we can't be the people who are negligent or lax or liberal when it comes to the abandoning of prayer. And that's become a common thing amongst the Muslims. That you have a person say, "I'm Muslim, but I don't pray." But to the early Muslims, that was something that was unacceptable. You can't put those two things together. That's an oxymoron. I'm a Muslim, I don't pray. But nowadays it's become commonplace. And again, go back to what we said before, that on the scale of where you are in faith, how do you gauge yourself as where I'm in faith? The salat is your gauge. If you don't pray, what did Allah say about the people who don't pray? مَا سَلَكَكُمْ فِي سَقَرْ قَالُوا لَمْ نَكُنْ مُصَلِّينَ. It'll be said to them, "What caused you to go to the hellfire?" They say, "We didn't pray." So we have to understand, brothers and sisters, that not praying is very serious, and we have to stop being lax when it comes to not praying. And last but not least from the lessons is that from the qualities of the munafiqeen, from the qualities of the hypocrites, is that they withhold small kindnesses. And that's another thing that we as believers have to learn from this surah, not to be like that. And there are lots of small kindnesses that we sometimes withhold. Small kindness like what? As-salam. You meet a person, you see a person in Walmart, you see a person out in public, you see them at Trader Joe's, you see them at the mall, you see them at a carnival, you see them at Krispy Kreme donuts, whatever it is, you see them at a gas station. You know them, you recognize them as a Muslim. And that small kindness of Assalamu alaik, we can't even give that. Small kindness, a smile. What's up? What's going on, brother? And just smiling in the face of your brother is a kindness, it's a charity. And there's no skin off our nose. Smiling is easier than frowning, and you'll get a reward for it. And we can't even do that. A small kindness like that. And there are many other small kindnesses, but the al-muhim, we have to learn to be the people who gladly give these small kindnesses. 1, because it's good. 2, because of a good deed, we'll get a reward for it. And 3, because we want to avoid being from the people who have the qualities or demonstrate the qualities of the munafiqeen. And with that, we'll come to a close. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless your houses, to bless your spouses, to bless the rest of your evening, to bless your families and your children, to bless the rest of your day, and to make you blessed, to bless you and to make you blessed wherever you may be. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who listen to the talk and follow the best of it. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who He teaches beneficial knowledge and who He truly benefits from the knowledge that He's teaching us by making us from those who truly put it into practice. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.